They called me Eli the Ghost because I knew how to move through places without leaving a trace. That's probably why Angela called me when she stumbled upon the job of a lifetime. At first, I thought she was joking. An underground vault buried beneath a city, guarded not just by walls and security systems, but by time itself. This isn't your average bank job, Angela had said, sliding the faded blueprints across the table to me. The lines of a long-abandoned subway network intersected over what looked like a massive vault. It's more like a treasure hunt, she added, her dark eyes daring me to say no. I didn't say no. The team met in the back room of a rundown billiards hall 2 blocks from Angela's apartment. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions if you paid for your drinks in cash. Around the table sat my crew: Angela, the mastermind, Marco, the muscle, and Owen, our tech guy. Angela tapped the map, her long nails clicking against the paper. "This vault is a ghost," she began. "It doesn't officially exist. It was built in the 1950s by the city's elites to stash their cash, illegal earnings, bribes, you name it. When the subway system expanded, the tunnels leading to it were decommissioned and buried under layers of bureaucracy. But the vault? The vault is still there." "How do you know it's still there?" Marco grunted, arms crossed. Angela shot him a look. "I have my sources." I leaned forward. "What's the catch?" Angela smirked. "The catch is getting there. The tunnels are a maze. Some of them are flooded, some collapsed, and some might still be monitored. And the vault itself? It's sealed tighter than a tomb. We're going to need every trick in the book to crack it." Owen whistled. "Sounds like fun." "It's not fun," I said, looking at Angela. "It's suicide if we're not careful. What's the take?" She paused, letting the moment hang. 10 million, maybe more. Diamonds, gold, cash, everything the city's richest wanted to hide from Uncle Sam. 10 million. My chest tightened. It was enough to disappear forever, to never look over my shoulder again. We divided the job into 3 phases. The first was reconnaissance. Angela and I would scout the tunnels, mapping out a safe route to the vault. The second was logistics, figuring out how to transport the loot without being noticed. And the third? That was the hard part, cracking the vault itself. "I'll need a few days to hack into the city's old surveillance grid," Owen said. "If any of the sensors are still active, I'll disable them remotely." Marco cracked his knuckles. "And I'll handle any obstacles we find underground." Angela looked at me. "And you, Eli? You'll lead us through. This maze is your territory now." I nodded. "I'll need time to study the maps. And I'll need to see the tunnels for myself." That night, I spread the maps across my kitchen table. The lines twisted and turned like veins, branching off into dead ends and uncharted voids. I traced the route Angela had marked, stopping at the vault's location. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a heist. It was a gamble against history itself. No one had stepped foot in those tunnels in decades. I flipped open my notebook and began sketching a plan, but my thoughts kept drifting to my father. He used to talk about heists like they were puzzles, each one with a unique solution. "The trick," he'd said, "is knowing which pieces to leave behind." I hoped I still had his knack for it. The next morning, Angela and I slipped into the subway tunnels through an access hatch hidden in an alley. The air was damp and smelled like rust. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and broken tracks. "Creepy, huh?" Angela said, her voice echoing. "It's not the tunnels I'm worried about," I replied. We moved in silence, following the map's route. Occasionally, Angela would pause to mark a wall with chalk or jot notes in her notebook. After an hour, we reached a section of the tunnel that had partially collapsed. Angela cursed under her breath. "We'll need Marco to clear this," she said. I scanned the debris, noticing a narrow gap near the top. "Maybe not," I said, climbing up to inspect it. The gap led to another tunnel, one not marked on the map. "Found a shortcut," I called down. Angela climbed up after me, her flashlight sweeping the new tunnel. "This isn't on the plans," she said. "That's what makes it perfect," I replied. "No one will expect us to use it." Back at the hideout, we regrouped to discuss the next steps. Marco was eager to test his equipment, a set of portable hydraulic drills capable of cutting through metal and stone. Owen showed us a prototype of a signal jammer that would disable any alarms in the vault. This is going to work, Angela said, more to herself than anyone else. It has to, I replied, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Deep down, I knew the tunnels held secrets we hadn't uncovered yet, and secrets I'd learned had a way of biting back. The tunnels felt like they were alive. Every step echoed back in strange, warped patterns, as though the walls were whispering to each other. It was just Angela and me on this trip. Reconnaissance, nothing more. Marco wanted to come, but Angela shut him down. We can't afford to bring a battering ram on a scouting mission, she'd said. She wasn't wrong. Marco's version of problem-solving usually left a trail of destruction behind, and this phase was all about staying unnoticed. Eli, hold up! Angela tapped my shoulder and shone her flashlight on a strange marking etched into the tunnel wall. It was faint, a series of jagged lines arranged like an arrow. What do you think? She asked. I crouched down, running my fingers over the grooves. Old maintenance code, maybe. Could be pointing toward a supply shaft or emergency exit. Or it's nothing. Just some graffiti left by whoever used to work down here. Angela frowned. Let's follow it anyway. I've learned not to ignore the little things. That was Angela, always trusting her instincts, even when the rest of us couldn't see the logic. I didn't argue. Her gut had gotten us out of plenty of tight spots before. The markings led us deeper into the maze, down tunnels that didn't appear on any of the maps. My flashlight beam flickered over rusted rails and half-collapsed support beams. Ever think about how many people used to walk these tunnels? Angela asked, her voice soft. Not really, I said, stepping over a pile of debris. I do. Hundreds of workers, commuters. This place was alive once. Now it's just forgotten. Good for us, though. Fewer eyes. She smiled faintly. Yeah, still feels weird, like we're trespassing in a graveyard. We reached an intersection where the air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth was overwhelming. My flashlight caught a glint of something metallic on the ground, a rusted ladder leading down into an access shaft. Think this is the way? Angela asked, peering into the abyss. Only one way to find out. I clipped my flashlight to my belt and started climbing down. The ladder groaned under my weight, but it held. The shaft opened into a narrow corridor with walls lined in crumbling brick. The floor was slick with water, and the sound of dripping echoed all around us. Angela joined me a moment later, her boots splashing as she landed. This has to lead somewhere, she said, shining her flashlight ahead. We moved cautiously, the silence pressing in on us. My mind raced with possibilities. Were there still active security measures down here? Motion sensors? Pressure plates? Or worse, had someone else beaten us to the vault? Hold up, Angela whispered. I froze. Ahead of us, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. I crept forward, peeking around the corner. The room was massive, its walls lined with corroded pipes and ancient machinery. In the center stood a heavy steel door, its surface covered in rivets and faded lettering. The vault, Angela breathed. Looks like it, I replied, my voice barely audible. We approached slowly, examining the door. It was sealed tight, with no visible hinges or handles. Owen's tools would definitely be put to the test. Angela ran her fingers over the lettering. The lock mechanism must be internal. There's no keypad, no access panel. Which means the original key is long gone, I said. Not necessarily. She pointed to a small, rectangular slot near the base of the door. This could be an override system. Owen might be able to rig something. I nodded, already taking mental notes for our next trip. On our way back to the surface, the tension was palpable. Angela's mind was clearly racing, and I couldn't blame her. Finding the vault was one thing. Getting into it would be another. What's on your mind, I asked as we climbed back through the access shaft. Just thinking about contingencies, she said. What if the route collapses? What if there's another team after the same score? Then we adapt, I said simply. That's what we do. She laughed softly. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, but it's possible. When we finally emerged back into the alley, the sunlight felt almost blinding after hours in the dark. Angela leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from her brow. We've got a shot at this, she said, more to herself than to me. Yeah, I replied, looking back at the hatch we'd climbed through. We do, but we're not out of the woods yet. Back at the hideout, the atmosphere was electric. Marco and Owen listened intently as Angela and I recounted our findings. The vault is there, she said, slapping the map for emphasis. It's real, and it's intact. But getting in will be tricky. We'll need Owen's signal jammer and Marco's tools to crack it. About time I got to smash something, Marco said with a grin. Owen looked less enthusiastic. And you're sure there's no active security down there? No cameras? No motion sensors? None that we saw, I said, but it's always possible there's something we missed. Owen sighed. Great. No pressure. Angela leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. This is it, guys, the score of a lifetime. We've got the plan, we've got the skills, and now we've got the location. We just need to execute. I glanced at the map, then at the faces around the table. For a moment, I felt the weight of what we were about to do. This wasn't just a job. It was a leap into the unknown. And if we weren't careful, it could very well be our last. I could barely sleep the night before our next descent into the tunnels. Every creak of the hideout seemed amplified. Every faint sound a reminder of how much we had riding on this. Angela spent the night sketching out more maps. Owen tinkered with his tools, and Marco sharpened his blades, though I wasn't sure why he needed them underground. The plan was simple in theory. Owen would disable any ancient or modern security measures. Angela would guide us through the labyrinth using our makeshift maps, and Marco and I would handle any physical obstacles in our path. But plans always looked pretty on paper until you tried to execute them. Ready for this? Angela asked as we stood by the rusted hatch leading back into the depths. Always, I replied, tightening my gloves. Marco grunted as he hauled a massive bag of equipment onto his back. If this doesn't work, I'm blaming Owen. Owen rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure, because everything's my fault. Let me remind you, I'm the one keeping us from tripping a 1,000-year-old alarm system. Angela cut through the banter. Enough. Focus. Once we're down there, no more talking unless it's absolutely necessary. We descended in silence, the air growing colder with each rung of the ladder. The tunnels greeted us like an old friend, or maybe a vengeful ghost. Every step we took echoed in the same unnerving way, a chorus of whispers that seemed to follow us wherever we went. As we retraced our path to the vault, Angela paused at every junction, double-checking our bearings against the maps. The markings we'd followed earlier appeared again, but now they seemed more deliberate, almost guiding us forward. These weren't made by accident, she murmured, running her fingers over the jagged lines. Think someone else found the vault before us? I asked. Maybe, or maybe they'd never made it back out. Marco snorted. Great. Love the optimism. When we reached the vault chamber, it felt almost surreal. The massive steel door stood as imposing as ever, its riveted surface glinting in the beam of our flashlights. Owen immediately went to work, kneeling beside the override slot and unpacking his tools. Give me some space, he muttered, pulling out a device that looked like a cross between a laptop and a car battery. Angela and I stood back, watching as he connected a series of wires to the slot. The screen on his device flickered to life, displaying a stream of code that I couldn't even begin to understand. How's it looking? Angela asked after a few minutes. Complicated, Owen replied, his voice tight with concentration. This thing's ancient, but there are modern layers grafted onto it. Someone's been down here in the last decade at least. Can you crack it? I asked. He didn't answer right away, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Finally, he said, I can try. Just don't rush me. While Owen worked, Marco and I set up a perimeter, checking for any signs of movement or potential hazards. Angela stayed close to Owen, watching over his shoulder and occasionally offering suggestions. You know, Marco said as we scanned the chamber, this whole thing feels off. Off how? I asked, not taking my eyes off the shadows ahead. Like we're being watched, or like this is some kind of trap. I glanced at him. You getting cold feet? He scowled. Never. Just saying we should be careful. Noted. A soft beep broke the tension, and we turned to see Owen grinning triumphantly. I got it, he said, stepping back from the door. The vault door hissed and groaned, gears turning as it slowly began to open. The air that rushed out was stale, carrying the scent of dust and metal. Inside, the space was dark, but the faint glint of something caught our eyes. We stepped inside cautiously, our flashlights revealing rows of safety deposit boxes and shelves lined with stacks of cash, gold bars, and what looked like priceless artifacts. It was everything we dreamed of, and more. "Jackpot," Marco said, his voice filled with awe. Angela wasted no time. "All right, stick to the plan. Take only what we can carry and what's easiest to move. No greed." "Speak for yourself," Marco muttered, already stuffing his bag with gold bars. Owen, meanwhile, focused on the artifacts, carefully selecting pieces that looked valuable, but not so unique that they'd be immediately missed. Angela and I worked together to load stacks of cash into our bags, keeping an eye on the time. "We've got 15 minutes, Angela said. "Then we're out of here, whether we're done or not." I nodded, my mind racing as I tried to calculate the value of what we'd already packed. It was more than enough to set us up for life, but the temptation to grab just a little more was hard to resist. As we worked, a faint sound reached my ears, a soft scraping, like something moving in the distance. "Did you hear that?" I asked, freezing in place. Angela looked up sharply. "Hear what?" "Sounded like, I don't know, something scraping against metal." Marco frowned. "Probably just the tunnels settling." But Angela didn't look convinced. "We're almost done here. Let's wrap it up and move." The scraping sound came again, louder this time. My heart raced as I turned toward the entrance, my flashlight beam scanning the darkness. There was nothing there, or at least nothing I could see. "Move!" Angela ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. We grabbed our bags and headed for the exit, the weight of our haul slowing us down. As we climbed back into the tunnels, the sound followed us, an eerie reminder that we weren't as alone as we'd thought. By the time we reached the surface, my nerves were shot. Angela was already reviewing our haul, while Marco and Owen argued over who'd carried the heaviest load. "Something's not right," I said, interrupting them. Angela looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. "The sound, the feeling. It's like we weren't supposed to find that vault." She frowned but didn't dismiss my concerns. "We'll talk about it later. For now, let's focus on the next steps." But as we loaded the bags into the van, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd awakened something down there, and it wasn't done with us yet. The drive back to the hideout was quieter than usual. Marco slouched in the passenger seat, flipping through his phone, while Angela rode shotgun, scribbling in her notebook. Owen sat beside me in the back, his laptop open and humming softly. No one spoke, and the silence felt heavy, like we'd left part of ourselves in the tunnels. I broke the quiet. "Angela, did you notice anything odd about the vault? Like something that didn't belong?" She paused, her pen hovering over the page. "Like what?" "I don't know," I said, shifting uncomfortably. "The way it was sealed, the markings in the tunnels, even the air down there. It felt wrong." Marco chuckled from the front seat. "Oh, come on. Don't start with the ghost stories." "I'm not joking," I shot back. "Didn't you hear that scraping sound?" Angela exchanged a glance with Marco before replying. "We've been in old tunnels full of rusted metal and crumbling rock. Strange noises are par for the course." Owen chimed in without looking up. "I didn't hear anything, but you're probably just spooked from all the tension. Happens to everyone." I nodded, though their reassurances didn't fully ease my mind. Something about that place had gotten under my skin. Back at the hideout, the atmosphere lightened as we unpacked our haul. Angela spread everything out on the long wooden table in the center of the room, organizing the cash, gold, and artifacts into neat piles. The sheer volume of wealth was staggering. Marco whistled, running a hand through his hair. "I've seen a lot of scores, but this is a retirement fund." Angela ignored him, her focus on cataloging the items. "We need to be smart about this. No flashy spending, no sudden moves. We'll offload the artifacts first. They're the riskiest to hold on to. Owen, can you start finding buyers?" Owen nodded, already typing away on his laptop. "I've got a few contacts who specialize in this kind of thing. Might take a week or two to move everything." "And the cash?" I asked. Angela shrugged. "We'll launder it slowly. Open shell companies. Buy property, that kind of thing. The usual." Marco leaned back in his chair, grinning. Man, this is the life. One big score, and we're set. But as I watched Angela work, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we'd stolen more than just money and artifacts. Something intangible had followed us out of the tunnels, and it was only a matter of time before it made itself known. That night, I had the first dream. I was back in the tunnels, standing in front of the vault. The door was open, but the chamber beyond was pitch black. A faint scraping sound echoed in the darkness, growing louder with each passing second. I tried to move, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. Then out of the shadows, a figure emerged, a twisted silhouette with glowing eyes that burned like embers. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The room was silent, but I could still hear the scraping in my mind, like it had followed me into the waking world. The drive to the entrance of the subway tunnels was grim and silent. This time, no jokes, no music, no idle chatter, just the sound of the tires rolling over cracked asphalt and the occasional click of Marco flicking a lighter in the back seat. Angela navigated, her face set in a mask of determination, while Owen stared out the window, his hands clasped tightly around his tablet. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt, as though the tunnels themselves were exerting a pull on us. By the time we parked the van near the abandoned station, I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest. I wasn't sure if it was fear, anticipation, or something far worse. We geared up quickly, donning headlamps, gloves, and backpacks filled with tools. Angela handed out two-way radios to each of us. "Stay together," she said, her voice firm. "No wandering off, no splitting up. We go in, figure out what's going on, and get out. Got it?" "Crystal clear," Marco muttered, adjusting his flashlight. Owen hesitated at the edge of the tunnel, his fingers twitching nervously. "Are we sure about this? I mean, what if—" "We're sure," Angela snapped, cutting him off. "Now move." The tunnels felt different this time. The air was thicker, damp with a strange metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. Our footsteps echoed louder than before, the sound bouncing off the walls and making it hard to tell where we were going. Angela led the way, her map spread out before her, but even she seemed more hesitant with each turn. "I swear these tunnels weren't this twisted," she muttered under her breath, shining her flashlight on the walls. The markings she'd studied so carefully before now seemed almost alive, shifting under the beam of light. "Are you sure we're on the right path?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I'm sure," she replied, though her tone betrayed her doubt. "Just keep moving." We descended deeper into the maze, the air growing colder with every step. I caught glimpses of Marco glancing over his shoulder, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet tension. Even Owen, who rarely let anything faze him, was gripping his tablet like a lifeline. Then we heard it, a faint scraping sound, just like the one I'd heard during the heist. It came from somewhere ahead, growing louder with each passing second. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "Yeah," Marco said, his voice tight, "and I don't think it's rats." Angela held up a hand, signaling for us to stop. She switched off her headlamp, plunging us into darkness. One by one, we followed suit, standing perfectly still as the sound drew closer. It stopped abruptly, leaving us in a suffocating silence. For a moment, I thought we were in the clear, until a low, guttural groan echoed through the tunnel, sending chills down my spine. "What the hell was that?" Owen hissed. "Stay calm," Angela said, though I could hear the tremor in her voice. "It's probably just the wind." But we all knew better. When we finally reached the vault, it looked exactly as we'd left it. The heavy metal door was still ajar, the markings on its surface glowing faintly under the beam of my flashlight. But there was something new, a pile of rocks and debris in the corner that hadn't been there before. It looked like part of the wall had crumbled, revealing a narrow passageway leading deeper into the earth. Angela crouched down to examine it. "This wasn't here last time." Marco peered into the opening, his flashlight barely penetrating the darkness. "Think it leads to another chamber?" "Only one way to find out," Angela said, already pulling out a rope from her pack. "You've got to be kidding me," Owen said, shaking his head. "We came here to figure out what's going on, not go spelunking in some cursed tunnel." "I agree," I said, though I couldn't tear my eyes away from the passage. "Whatever's down there, it's not part of the original plan. Angela stood up, brushing dirt off her hands. This is bigger than the plan. If there's more down there, more artifacts, more cash, we need to know. But if you don't want to come, fine. Stay here. Marco grinned, his bravado returning. You're crazy, but I like it. Let's do this. Against my better judgment, I followed. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, forcing us to crawl on hands and knees. The air was stifling, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something faintly sweet and sickly that made my stomach churn. My flashlight flickered, and for a terrifying moment, I was plunged into darkness. Everyone okay back there? Angela called from the front. Define okay, Marco muttered, his voice muffled by the dirt. Finally, the passage opened up into a cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with strange ancient artifacts. Jewels, scrolls, and objects I couldn't begin to identify. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a single, glowing orb. What the hell is that? Owen whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. No idea, Angela said, stepping closer. But it doesn't belong here. As she reached for the orb, the chamber trembled, and a deafening roar filled the air. The markings on the walls began to glow, pulsating like a heartbeat. Angela, don't! I shouted, but it was too late. Her fingers closed around the orb, and the room erupted in chaos. The ground beneath us gave way, and we tumbled into darkness. I hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Around me, I could hear the others groaning, struggling to get up. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice hoarse. No kidding, Marco snapped, helping Angela to her feet. But as we scrambled to find an exit, the scraping sound returned, louder, closer, and unmistakably deliberate. Whatever we'd disturbed wasn't going to let us leave without a fight. The sound grew louder, a bone-chilling scrape that reverberated off the walls of the chamber. It wasn't just the noise. It was the oppressive presence that came with it. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber we'd fallen into was a dead end, with the collapsed passage behind us cutting off our retreat. Angela clutched the glowing orb tightly, her knuckles white. Marco's flashlight flickered, its beam trembling across the walls. Owen was frozen in place, his tablet shattered on the ground. Angela, I hissed, inching closer to her, put it back. Whatever you just grabbed doesn't belong to us. She shook her head, her voice defiant. We've come too far to leave empty-handed. This is the find of a lifetime. Find of a lifetime? Marco said, his voice shaking. Angela, we're being hunted. Whatever's out there, it's not human. The scraping sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The air grew colder, so cold I could see my breath misting in the dim light. My flashlight illuminated the far side of the chamber, where a shadow detached itself from the wall and began to move toward us. What the hell is that? Owen whispered, backing away. The shadow took form, twisted and angular, with limbs that moved unnaturally, as if it were being pulled by invisible strings. Its eyes glowed faintly, two pinpoints of light that locked onto Angela. Run! I shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the far corner of the room. Marco and Owen followed, their footsteps echoing in the cavern. We scrambled over the piles of debris, searching for an exit. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the walls, desperately hoping for a crack, a tunnel, anything that would get us out. There! Marco shouted, pointing to a narrow crevice near the floor. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was our only chance. One by one, we slid into the passage, the jagged rocks tearing at our clothes and skin. I was the last to go, casting one final glance over my shoulder. The creature was there, standing motionless at the edge of the room. Its glowing eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought it smiled. The passage led us into another series of tunnels, narrower and more claustrophobic than before. The air was damp and suffocating, filled with the smell of rot. My hands shook as I gripped my flashlight, the beam barely cutting through the darkness. What the hell was that thing? Marco panted, his voice echoing in the tight space. I don't know, Angela admitted, her defiance finally giving way to fear. I didn't know. You didn't know, Owen snapped, his voice rising. You dragged us down here for this insane heist, and now we're being hunted by something? Enough, I barked, turning to face them. Arguing isn't going to help us. We need to focus on getting out of here alive. Angela glanced down at the orb, its eerie glow lighting up her face. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. Maybe I should. Damn right you should, Marco interrupted. Drop it. Leave it here. Whatever it's not worth our lives. Angela hesitated, her grip tightening around the orb. I could see the conflict in her expression. The greed, the fear, the pride that refused to let her admit she'd made a mistake. Before she could decide, the scraping sound returned, louder and faster this time. The creature was following us. No time to argue, I said, grabbing the orb from her hands. Without thinking, I hurled it down the tunnel behind us. The orb hit the ground and shattered, its glow extinguished in an instant. The scraping sound stopped, replaced by a deafening roar that shook the walls. Run! I shouted, pushing them forward. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls closing in around us. I could hear the others gasping for breath, their footsteps uneven on the rocky ground. My own lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Finally, we emerged into a larger chamber, the faint light of the surface visible in the distance. A broken staircase led upward, its steps crumbling but intact enough to climb. There! Marco yelled, scrambling toward the stairs. We climbed as fast as we could, the sound of the creature's roar echoing behind us. The light grew brighter with each step, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. When we reached the top, the cool night air hit my face like a blessing. I turned to help Angela and Owen, pulling them up onto the platform. Marco was the last to climb, his face pale and slick with sweat. As soon as we were all out, I slammed the heavy iron grate shut, locking it with a rusted padlock. It wouldn't hold for long, but it was enough to buy us time. We stumbled away from the entrance, collapsing onto the pavement. For a long moment, none of us spoke, the only sound our ragged breathing. We're never doing this again, Owen finally said, his voice trembling. No argument here, Marco muttered, lying flat on his back. Angela didn't say anything. She just stared at the horizon, her face unreadable. In the end, we walked away with nothing. No money, no artifacts, not even the satisfaction of completing the heist. But we were alive, and that was more than I'd expected when I saw those glowing eyes in the dark. As we left the abandoned station behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd escaped something far worse than prison. Whatever was down there, it wasn't meant to be found. And if I had any say in it, no one else would ever find it again. Let's just forget this ever happened, I said, glancing back at the entrance one last time. For once, no one argued.